Because homelessness is actually the consequence of many other factors. People don't wake up in the morning and think, today I'm going to be homeless. Broad trends that we see that lead to homelessness are intergenerational trauma, and that's particularly prevalent in our First Nations peoples. Childhood abuse, which leads to that trauma. But for adults, it can often be things like family and domestic violence. It can be losing your job and not having the right safety nets in place.
There's another demographic which has come up a couple of times, and what I've been reading is elderly women with low superbalance.
I would say we're not even talking about elderly women here. We're probably talking about, women over 50, over 55, spent much of their life at home caring for the family, earning their own income and not accumulating superannuation. Often what we find are these older women are suddenly finding themselves that they have very few resources at hand. People who are couch surfing, people who are living in temporary accommodation, people who are living in their cars, people who, camped out somewhere. So not all people who are homeless are necessarily visible. Find out what is it that person actually needs.
Before we get started, please subscribe so that you never miss an episode of our cutting-edge contemporary conversations. Thank you.
Welcome, Michael. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Dev. Thanks for inviting me here to speak with you today.
Thank you for spending this time with me. I've known you for a good time now, but I think it's always good to, listen to your background and the history you have. And please give us as briefly or as elaboratively your background.
Be careful what you ask for. All right. Well, I'm the co-CEO of Uniting WA, which is a very large, diverse community services organization based here in metropolitan Perth, with services in Albion. But my background doesn't lead one to believe that I'd end up in community services. I have an undergraduate degree in biochemistry and biotech. And when I chose to migrate to Australia in 1994, I was very clear on my mission not to end up in that sector. And subsequently did an MBA and moved into general management and management consulting, which led me to the disability sector at about the time that the NDIS was being introduced. And from that opportunity to work with an organization at the beginning of that journey of transition, I was invited to Uniting Care West, as it was at that point, to lead a similar process. And from there, my role just continued to evolve across all the services that we offer at Uniting WA, which span disability, mental health, children, families, financial well-being. We're a community housing provider. But probably one of the things that we're most well known for is the work that we do in the homelessness space. And that's why we're here today to talk about that.
Lovely. Thank you. Can I go from the starting point of view, as in homelessness support is at the end of it? But if you can talk about the journey of what kind of demographic and what happens in people's life, and then what triggers those conversations on homelessness.
You've made a really good point there, because homelessness is actually the consequence of many other factors. People don't wake up in the morning and think, today I'm going to be homeless. That's my objective. And so what we know is that people are homeless for almost as many reasons as there are people who are experiencing homelessness. But the general broad trends that we see that lead to homelessness are intergenerational trauma, and that's particularly prevalent in our First Nations peoples. Childhood abuse, which leads to that trauma. But for adults, it can often be things like family and domestic violence. It can be losing your job and not having the right safety nets in place, and meaning that you suddenly can't afford to pay your mortgage or pay your rent. It can be a crisis in someone's life that leads them to, some mental health challenges, which could lead to some substance abuse issues. And substance abuse is often a big factor for people who are on the streets in terms of a protection mechanism for them.
Can you also paint a broader picture in terms of the sector, how it looks like in Western Australia? How many people are seeking homes, or what's the definition of homelessness, and how do you define somebody who's homeless? And then, what's the numbers look like for the state of WA?
So when we speak of homelessness, often the first image that comes to mind is people sleeping rough on the streets. And of course, there's a much greater visibility of that these days, certainly in Perth, but also in some of our regional centres in Western Australia. But homelessness encompasses much more than that. It's really for anybody who doesn't have a stable, secure housing. You can consider them homeless at one level. So we get people who are couch surfing, people who are living in temporary accommodation, people who are living in their cars, people who camped out somewhere. So not all people who are homeless are necessarily visible. At any one point in time in Western Australia, there's probably between 9,000 and 10,000 people who are homeless. And certainly we know that in the Perth area, there's probably 1,000 people sleeping rough every night across the metropolitan area. And we know some of this information because we're getting to be a much more collaborative sector in terms of addressing homelessness. So we have what's called the By Name list now, which operates in parts of the metropolitan area where we actively seek to identify people who are experiencing homelessness in order to look at what their needs are and how we can move them through the system that leads to people having a home.
And how is the linkage between the idea of the affordable housing and what's that definition, or what's the linkage between the poverty line, which you define that that much money you need to have to call under the line, above the line, and this economic conditions in the state towards the trigger of being on the verge of homeless?
Gosh, there's a lot of answers in that question, Dev. So firstly, with respect to affordable housing, I feel like there's kind of two perceptions of what affordable housing is, and we're not really clear on that in the community and in the media and even in the sector to some extent. So on one level, we talk about housing that's affordable to buy for people who are in the housing market. And we've got organizations like Keystart who are there to help people get their first foot in the door with housing. But there's another aspect to affordable housing, which is really what's affordable public housing or affordable rental housing for people. And that comes under certain definitions within the community housing sector. And then below affordable housing, we've got, of course, social housing, which has got very low income caps sitting around $26,000 to $28,000 a year for an individual to access social housing.
What do you think is the linkage between the economic conditions in the state of Western Australia to lead or trigger homelessness or create conditions that more people are on the verge of being homeless?
So post-COVID, we've seen lots of change in our society and in our community and in our economy. And of course, one of the biggest changes is that we now face this housing crisis. And so what's come out of that is, firstly, the housing crisis is a consequence of probably 3 to 4 decades of inactivity by government, central government, in terms of investing in social and affordable housing for people on lower incomes. And that's come home to roost now, of course, with the serious lack of social and affordable housing in the market. At the same time, we've seen immigration levels rise. We've seen the lack of a skilled workforce in the construction industry, which means that we've had, not been able to keep up with the new housing that's required, and the cost of living in general going up. And all of that's created a perfect storm where even people who are on a relatively good income are finding it very difficult to find affordable rentals. An affordable rental is defined as less than 30% of your weekly income. And we know that in Perth, the median rental rate is much higher than that now. So the tipping point for many people is that they have a reason to move. Either they're asked to move by a landlord because the landlord wants to take back the property, or they need to relocate. And even if they're on a good income, they suddenly can't find a place to rent or certainly to buy in the current market.
There's another demographic which has come up a couple of times in what I've been reading, is elderly women with low super balance, or could you talk a bit more of that cohort and that demographic, the challenges they face, how they're different than a typical homelessness participant?
So I would say we're not even talking about elderly women here. We're probably talking about, women over 50, over 55, people of my generation who have spent much of their life at home caring for the family and therefore not working, not earning their own income and not accumulating superannuation.
Yeah.
And then if there's a family breakdown or if husband passes away or there's domestic violence involved, often what we find are these older women are suddenly finding themselves that they are have very few resources at hand. And again, because of the cost of living and the housing and rental crisis, few choices as to where to live. So certainly in the services that we offer for people experiencing homelessness, we're seeing older women who are living in their cars. We're seeing older women who are living on the streets or in tents. And the gender inequity there is quite visible in terms of that disparity between men of that age group and women of that age group and the resources they have at hand if there is a trigger in their life that means that they are now at risk of homelessness.
From a point of view of the state government or the federal government, what's typical tools they use to create more supply in the market? What's the typical, and then how long does it take for those tools or those ideas or the concepts to come into fruition? And what's the typical gestation period for that to work?
So you're referring to housing itself?
Yeah.
I'm probably not a very good person to provide you with very specific answers on this, so I'll just talk generally.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. So as I said earlier, we're talking about the current situation being the consequence of 30 or 40 years of government inaction on investment in social and affordable housing. So what we do know is that no matter what catalysts government provides in terms of encouraging development of social and affordable housing, it's going to take years just to catch up to where we should be. And that doesn't take into account increased population, higher cost of living, increased risk of homelessness. So the federal government has introduced the Housing Australia Future Fund, which is intended to support a broad range of investors, property developers, community housing organizations, to initiate projects that will provide some scale to the development of new housing. State governments around the country are looking at different versions of that themselves. Here in Western Australia, we've got a state government and a minister for housing who's been very proactive about offering grants to organizations and housing providers to establish new properties or to refurbish existing properties. So there are things underway, but they will take, it takes years. We know it takes, 12 to 18 months to build one house. So, and at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, we've got a lack of skilled workers in the construction industry. And even if we look at immigration to bring them in, whether that's external or from the eastern states, we have the issue of where are we going to house them when we don't have homes.
And from a uniting point of view, what are the typical services you provide if somebody, calls you guys and come over and have a chat and in terms of they need support? What are typical support services under that umbrella you provide?
Yeah, we've got a real continuum of services that we offer through Uniting WA specifically. And of course, we're working across the whole sector as well, collaborating with other organizations that have complementary services. But at Uniting itself, we have outreach services. So we've got teams that actively go out and engage with people who are sleeping rough, who might not know about engagement hubs, such as the one that we have, or might be wary of approaching an engagement hub. So our outreach workers build rapport with people to then build that trust so that they can then find out what is it that person actually needs. Our engagement hub itself, which is located in Northbridge, we see anywhere from 250 to 350 people every day who are seeking, in the first instance, essential support. So showers, laundry facilities, hot food, an opportunity to change their clothes. But we also have more than a dozen visiting services on a regular basis that provide allied health support, legal support. Services Australia is there 5 days a week at our Tranby Engagement Hub. We've got vets who come and run clinics once a month for people who are sleeping on the streets who've got pets with them. Podiatrists, short back and sidewalks, which offers the opportunity for people to have haircuts. So we have a number of visiting services that can support people in that moment in time with what their immediate needs might be. Further to that, we have key workers who then will work with people who identify that perhaps they're looking for an opportunity to get into a rehab service, or they're really keen to get into some sort of crisis accommodation or transitional accommodation. And our key workers work with those people to do the best that they can to try and get them into something as soon as possible that will suit their needs. We offer crisis accommodation. We have a facility that is very low barrier for people who have been sleeping rough. And if we can accommodate them there, they are welcome to stay as long as they need to stay. And often that stability helps them prepare themselves for a move into rehab or a move into another transitional accommodation. Further to that, we do have transitional accommodation as well, which is longer term, for people to stay up to 12 months. While they perhaps are getting ready for employment at that point. And then from there, we seek to support people to move into more permanent housing by getting them on the public housing list and whatnot. Of course, that's a real challenge at this moment in time. And what we're finding is that we can get people into crisis and transitional accommodation, but then it's very difficult to move them beyond that, which then creates a real bottleneck. In addition to that, we have financial well-being services, so with access to emergency relief, financial counseling for people who perhaps are at a point where they're not, they're at a stage where they're at risk of homelessness, but with some financial counseling support, we might be able to keep them from actually entering homelessness. And what's called a scheme called the Work Development Permit, which enables people who've got hefty fines on their record from all sorts of things to work off those fines by doing different forms of community service and education and learning through Uniting and other agencies.
Lovely. As you were talking, initially, as you said, define multiple demographics who are in need of housing support, short and long term. One of that was drug addiction you talked about. And if you can explain through a scenario and an example, how does a rehab look like if somebody going on that journey? What are the stages look like?
So the substance abuse issues are really prevalent amongst people who are sleeping rough in particular. And one of the reasons for that is that for people who are sleeping on the streets, often drug use in particular actually helps them stay awake at night and keeps them feeling safe. So there's an irony in that, of course, in that they are then becoming addicted to some of the harder drugs that are out there in order to stay safe. But of course, that has pretty significant consequences for them. So when people come into Tranby Engagement Hub, for instance, and they're seeking an opportunity to rehabilitate, to address their addiction issues, one of the first things that we can do is try and get them into something like our crisis accommodation service, because often just the stability of having a few nights, 3 to 5 nights of a good night's sleep without the need to take drugs is a great starting point. From there, we work with other agencies in Perth who are specialists in alcohol and drug abuse, and we would refer people to those agencies for support. And there's different forms that a rehabilitation can take. There's some live-in treatment centers. There's some people require medical support and intervention in order to take that first step. And others, it might be counseling services and other programs that are out there that can support them while they take that journey for themselves. But a key factor in all of that is that stability that's required in order for people to feel safe and secure at night.
In your observation, what the end of the solution is, provide a short-term accommodation and stability. And the way you talk about people might come back again, be homeless, and then they have a stable life for some time, and then they move to getting a job, and then something happens in their life and they come back into the homelessness cycle again. So how often does that happen? And is that a bigger challenge than, trying to rehab the same person?
In terms of how often it happens, I mean, it does happen. We know that people go through cycles of homelessness, and there's again, lots of reasons that underpin that in terms of their own life. And it can be that it can be for many reasons. The trauma, medical needs, they lose their job, they're often family involvement becomes complicated in terms of people maintaining tenancies in public housing. We're non-judgmental when it comes to that. If somebody, that we've supported through that pathway to a permanent or a stable form of housing turns up back at Tranby Engagement Hub again, we just start from the beginning again with them, because everybody has challenges in their lives, and it might take time, but we certainly have worked with people who've gone through those cycles on a number of occasions and have ended up being successfully housed.
And what do you see the difference between people who have successfully transitioned and living the best life they can versus what's the key element or key magic sauce working there?
One of the key elements is access to support. So there's a model of support that we are embracing here in Western Australia called Housing First. And what that involves is that we get people into housing and then we put wraparound supports in place for them. We can't assume that somebody, just because we've put them in a unit with a bed and a kitchen, is going to be able to survive and thrive in that environment if they've experienced lots of trauma, haven't held a tenancy for a long period of time, still have other challenges in their lives. And so the existence of wraparound supports often makes that critical difference for people, so that they can maintain that tenancy when they've got a challenge in their life. They've got someone to speak to, they've got someone to support them, somewhere to go for support and assistance in order to keep them in place. And some people will need that for the rest of their lives, and that's okay. Others will need it for a period of time, and then they'll get that stability that they need. And I mean, there's as many factors as there are people as to why that does or doesn't happen for certain individuals.
And do you think in terms of the counseling provided across that phase is also a critical element in terms of, so that the mindset is supports, and how does the counseling process works or doesn't work in people who have trauma, which is intergenerational, which is way more deep than the skin. It has taken a longer time to set in their life, and the trauma is existing in every part of their life, not just housing opportunities, but everything they do. So what kind of solutions are around that kind of challenges, or those kind of challenges?
Gosh, you're probably putting me out of my depth again here with that question. Let me just think about that.
Take your time.
Yeah. Intergenerational trauma is incredibly complex, and there's no single solution for addressing it or for supporting people through it. And some people may never be able to overcome it. What we can do as service providers, as individuals, as a community, is understand and recognize that sometimes it's the trauma that's causing the behaviors that we might otherwise view as antisocial or violent or aggressive, and that they're not directed at us as individuals, they're directed at the experiences that these people have had. It's a journey for every person that has that sitting within them, and requires them to want to address it, and for us, broadly speaking, to have the resources at hand to support people to move through that trauma and get to a place where it's not impacting them so deeply.
Thank you for sharing that. Can you talk more on the politics of homelessness? Because the political class is a short-term animal, which comes for every 4 years and change in the state, and federally every 3 years. And how does the housing strategy or social and affordable housing strategy has evolved during the changing times of the state elections or state politicians versus federal?
So I think that for a long, long time, homelessness has never been considered a significant issue in Australia. And it's only in the last 6 to 8 years that we as a society have really started to recognize that Australia isn't the lucky country for everybody, and that many, many people are either homeless or at risk of homelessness imminently. There was a report that came out earlier this week from Homelessness Australia that talks about since 2016, the risk of homelessness for vulnerable people has increased by 63%, and places that the number of vulnerable people in Australia who are at imminent risk of homelessness or who are homeless at somewhere between 2.7 and 3.2 million. So this is now an issue that politicians at all levels cannot ignore anymore. So we talk about state government and federal government, but we've also got local government. And certainly at Uniting, what we've seen is a much greater willingness and understanding to address homelessness at local government level. We've got a state government that has a dedicated minister for homelessness, which is a first in Australia, and a 10-year strategy from the state government, as well as a 10-year strategy from the WA Alliance to End Homelessness, which is a consortium of homelessness sector organizations that have committed to this as well, all of which lay out a roadmap for future governments in terms of how we are going to address this issue. At a national level, we haven't had a strategy to address homelessness. However, there is one under development right now, which is really reassuring because, again, once we get these instilled at policy level, we are able to worry a little bit less about the election cycle in terms of what successive governments may choose or not choose to do. We know that the housing crisis is a consequence of 30 to 40 years of underinvestment by governments of all flavors across the nation, and not just in this country, in other countries as well. And it's come to a point now within within media, within our community, within our society, where we recognize broadly that this is an issue that government needs to solve. So I think that will hold successive governments to account more than anything.
In that next 10-year plan for the homelessness, ending homelessness in the state, what's the biggest arguments in terms of what are the biggest asks? And then from a point of view of funding and then delivery of housing, how much it is underfunded and what's the gap looks like?
So we're halfway through the 10-year strategy, and that we've made lots of progress. We've got a much more cohesive sector in Western Australia, certainly, around how do we work together to address homelessness. We have had significant investment from our state government in terms of recognizing that homelessness services were underfunded. At a federal level, the report that I mentioned from Homelessness Australia talks about unmet demand and the need for greater investment at a federal level in homelessness services, which would trickle down to the states. We have Housing Australia Futures Fund. We've got state governments providing grants or creating these future funds as well for housing. So there's certainly a lot going on to address it. Part of the issue is time. So it will take time to build the homes, the houses, the units, the accommodation that we need to house people who are currently homeless or at risk of homelessness. And so we just look to successive governments to continue to invest in the sector to hold people right now in that place, but to also look to the future at what's needed to ensure that we're not just continuously holding the current status quo forever.
Most of the times, the advocacy groups, the typical argument is more funding. That's a typical first line of attack. But could you talk about, are there any good models which have worked in which the private enterprise have come into building houses, and what kind of incentives? Because the government can throw in more money, but how have are there efficiencies in that in terms of just government funding or including government plus private plus charities together, creating a functioning partnership to create a long wait list of housing coming through?
So my mind's gone to 3 responses to this question,
Please.
Deb. So thank you. So the first, I think what illustrates the model that you're talking about best is a project that Uniting WA has underway. And in actual fact, we turned sod on it this week. A project in Fremantle where we have a property that we own that was no longer fit for purpose for its original use. And we've had significant contribution from state government, from Lottery West, to fund the construction of what will be a 12-bed transitional facility for older women experiencing homelessness. Now, that would not have come about without the pro bono support that we've received from Housing All Australians over the last 3 years or so, where we've garnered about $1 million in pro bono in-kind and material donations from architects, engineers, project managers, suppliers, you name it. We've got this. All of this has come together to create the project, which then the government saw the value in investing in it. At the same time, we've sought private donations from people to support as well. And so as a consequence of that, we're going to be developing this facility that we would not have had the means to do otherwise. My second response around what can we do better is the collaboration. And I think the standout example for me in Perth is what we call the HEART Consortium. So HEART is an assertive outreach consortium of 4 agencies that commenced after we'd had some significant issues with encampments springing up around the Perth metropolitan area. And rather than these 4 agencies, including Uniting, operating separately and independently, we're coordinated by the Department of Communities to work across most of the metropolitan area now and work together to identify people and to work with individuals in terms of how can we move you from the street to the next step for you. Thirdly, out of HEART has come a much stronger approach to the by name list. And I mentioned the by name list earlier. And so with this consortium approach, we've been able to really clearly identify hundreds of people who are sleeping rough and determine what their specific needs are to be better able to figure out what's the solution for each individual in terms of moving them into that next stage of that transition out of homelessness.
I had a question on the workforce and what kind of people who would are attracted to working in this sector in terms of the front line, who are going and having those conversations with people who are sleeping rough. And it takes a different mindset or a personality to, because typically an average audience will not do that. Average people will not do that. So what do you see in terms of the workforce who are seeking those kind of roles?
Our frontline workforce is amazing. The frontline workforce of all organizations in the homelessness sector is absolutely incredible. These are people who are compassionate, kind, generous, courageous, bold, problem solvers, empathy. They're able to build rapport with people, and resilient, I think, is a really, really key feature, because it's not easy. Building rapport with somebody who's been sleeping rough doesn't happen with 1 visit or 2 visits or 3 visits. It might take weeks or months to build that rapport. And people are often not at their best when they're sleeping rough. And yet our frontline workforce accepts them as they are, doesn't pass judgment, and works, continues to try to work, perseverance to try and work with people to, take them on the journey that they might want to go on.
Oh.
So much respect for our workforce, so much respect.
And my concluding question on broad housing and homelessness is around how might we, as a country, which we call, as we said, the richest country, probably, one of the wealthy nations in the world, how might we come to a more intimate understanding of, you have to support the vulnerable. You have to take small but crucial steps towards ending homelessness one day. There's so many objectives to be achieved, but that's the bare minimum you could do for your fellow countrymen.
That's a very deep question. One thing to recognize in all of us is that many, many, many people are not that far off of being homeless. So I wouldn't ever suggest passing judgment on the person that you walk past in the street, because you don't know their story.
Yeah.
And you don't know what it was that led them to that position that they're in at this moment in time. Compassion and kindness are just so crucial for us as a community. The risk that we have in being more individualistic is that we lose that compassion and that recognition that the greater good for all of us comes out of taking care of all of us. Don't know if I've really answered the question, because I don't know if there's a simple, straightforward answer. But, I really believe that we have to accept people as they are, and understand that there are reasons for that, and be prepared to support them if they, on whatever their journey is.
I think I'll have a supplementary question. Have homelessness touched you personally in your life?
No, it hasn't touched me personally. But I see it every day. And I've seen it probably most days of my entire life, even if I didn't recognize it at the time, because of, self-interest, rather than looking outwards at what was going on around me.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Thanks, Steph.